Hello everyone, welcome to the Joget workshop, a live demo on Hashgraph Application Studio. My name is Penny and I'm your moderator for today's demo session. In this demo, we will showcase how you can visually build a decentralized application that interacts with the Hedera ecosystem, all the way from generating Hedera accounts, sending transactions and minting tokens, and at the same time exploring different opportunities for implementations in the finance sector. So before we begin, let's go over some housekeeping items. First of all, today's session will be recorded, and if you miss out any of our sessions today, no worries as you'll have the access to the recording later. And if you have any questions in between the session, do not hesitate to reach out to us via the chat or the Q&A button in the Zoom control panel, and we will get to it as many as we can at the end of the workshop. Moving on, you will also be directed to a feedback form after today's session. And as always, we are happy to hear about your workshop experience. Your opinions matter to us, and we really appreciate it if you could take a moment and provide your feedback for an improved workshop to attend in the future. Last but not least, stay till the end with us for a series of video tutorials and how you can redeem your free Academy voucher. And with that, today, we have Andrew Forson, the Global Blockchain Business Lead at Joget, and Justin Wee, the Special Projects Technology Manager at Joget. So, Andrew and Justin, would you like to say hi to the audience?
Hello, everyone. Welcome. And I'm really looking forward to exploring the Hashgraph App Studio with you all. Justin?
Thanks, Andrew, and welcome everyone to the workshop today. And I'm really excited to show the Hashgraph Application Studio to the audience today. Back to you, Penny.
Thank you. So let's take a look at today's agenda. And to start with, we will first have a quick introduction on Hedera and the Hashgraph Application Studio, followed by a live demo to walk you through the key features and capabilities, and how you can get started on the Hashgraph Application Studio built on Joget. So without further ado, before we dive into the demo, I will now pass it over to Andrew to kickstart the session. Andrew, over to you.
Thank you very much, Penny. I think many of us who are in the decentralized ledger or blockchain space, we're always having to make that decision about which chain to use. And Hedera has been one of those sleeper decentralized ledgers in that it's never one of the first that an enterprise will select to use unless they know a lot about developing decentralized applications. One of the things that always amazes me is Hedera itself has the most transactions and one of the highest transaction per second rates of all blockchain, of all decentralized ledgers. As I'm speaking, they are now at over 13 billion transactions on their mainnet, and they are running at 1,316 transactions per second. I think one other fundamental element that makes the Hedera decentralized ledger particularly attractive is the per transaction fee, which many of you would have heard referred to as a gas fee. Having a set per transaction fee, which I believe at the moment is in the region of 1% of 1 US cent, makes it very predictable and easy to model out financial applications that will leverage the Hedera decentralized ledger. Hedera itself is governed by a governing council, which is a critical element in that there is a community to it, but a critical element of the community is the large enterprises that provide feedback as to how the system, how the network should be constructed. And they use Hashgraph, which is a different type of validation mechanism, which is generally faster to achieve consensus and verify transactions. The native currency of Hedera is the H bar. And as I previously mentioned, one of the critical elements is it is able to support a very high number of transactions per second. And like most main tier one decentralized ledger technologies, it is open source, it is leaderless, and it is a proof of stake public network that facilitates the development of decentralized apps or dApps and the deployment. Today, we are privileged to have the company of Justin, one of the main architects of the Joget plugins associated with the Joget implementation of the Hashgraph Application Studio with us. And I think one of the critical elements that this technology provides is it makes it easy and fast and economical to build enterprise-grade applications that leverage all the features and functionalities native to the Hedera network. So with that, I would like to hand off back to Penny.
Thank you, Andrew. So let's deep dive into the demo. And I will now pass it over to our teammate Justin, and he will walk us through.
All right, thank you very much, Penny. So I'll share my screen very shortly, and we will get a deep dive into the Hashgraph Application Studio. Okay, so I would like to welcome all the audience once again. And for anyone here that is new to the Hashgraph Application Studio, I'll give you a quick rundown on what it is. So if you have been an experienced Joget app builder, the Hashgraph Application Studio really isn't a stranger. So if you have already learned how to build apps in Joget, a lot of that knowledge is pretty much one-to-one when you carry it over to the Hashgraph Application Studio with the add-on of being able to interact with the Hedera ledger. Now, if you are new to the Hashgraph Application Studio, a lot of the lessons can also be applied from the Joget system, because in essence, the Hashgraph Application Studio is a combination of no-code, low-code technology like Joget and integration and connectors with the Hedera ledger. So coming into the Hashgraph Application Studio, this is the first page you see, the App Center. Now, since I'm already logged in as the admin user, and since I am using the App Studio, I have all the necessary plugins already come built in. So there's no other steps that I need to do to start creating decentralized applications on Hedera. And if you're new, you also have a sample app that you can easily refer to over here to get to learn how to send transaction, how to mint, how to burn, and all that sort of stuff. So since we're here, I'm going to create a brand new application. We'll start from scratch, and let's just create a blank app. Now, about this app, I want to give it a little theme for this. So I'm just going to call this a loan management app over here, right? To give this a small theme related to loading tokenized assets, for example. So I'm just going to give this a meaningful name here, loan management app, and click save. And now what happens is we're brought to the App Studio. And to quickly describe this for any new users here, we have the form builders, which is to, well, create your forms for end users to view back the data, to enter data. We have the list to tabulate all the data. We got processes to orchestrate all of our business flows, our business logic, and finally the UI to compile all those components to expose it to end users to use. So for the first step in here, of course, as a prerequisite, I will need my Hedera portal credentials to get started with a testnet account. Now, if you haven't yet, you would go to portal.hedera.com and just sign up for an account. And once you have a testnet credential over here, all you pretty much need is your account ID and your private key in here, which I'm going to copy it very quickly. And first step, we are going to go to plugin default properties, and we are going to look for the Hedera backend configurator. So what this does is it's going to give us all of the configurations and pretty much keeps it in a secure location so that all of the Hedera plugins can refer to this single configuration. And in the future, if you're ready to go to mainnet, you can easily just toggle it right here and you are mainnet ready. So just like that, I save my credentials in here and we're ready to start building. So I'll come into builders and create a form. I want to show you a quick example of how we can first create accounts within a Joget form. So I'm going to name this form here account details. And for the table name here, it can be pretty much any name. So I'm just going to give it a meaningful name of sample account and click save. Okay, so now that we're in the form builder, we have our canvas that we can just drag and drop elements from the left palette. And first step, I'm going to name this section to something a bit more meaningful. I'll call this account details. And for a Hedera account, there's just 4 very basic fields that we need. And we're just going to drag those 4 fields. There are more information about the Hedera account, but we'll keep it simple for now. So for the first label, we'll need to store the account ID of that specific account. This will be the identifier. And next, we also need to store the account mnemonic phrase if we need to continue to interact with this account in the future. So I'm just going to name it as search. And next, we also need to know who exactly owns this account within the Application Studio. So I'm just going to name it as such. And finally, just one more field to indicate if this account belongs to the testnet or not. So once I key in all these very basic fields, I can, of course, once again, set this to read only since there's no need to meddle with the account data. And I can just click save over here. Okay, so once we have saved it, I can now make use of the app generator to help me generate some generic components like a CIUD to help us look into those account data later on. So now that we've generated a CIUD component in here, I'm going to come back to the App Studio, and you notice the list and the UI is already automatically generated for us. So if I were to launch this app right now, this is exactly what the end user will see. So in the demo after on, you will see me continuously going back and forth as the app designer and end user, so we can continuously enhance on top of our app and develop iteratively. So this is our CIUD component, and we have our list in here. If we want to quickly modify this list, I can also come back and make some simple modifications. So for example, the mnemonic phrase, we don't need to see that. We can take it out. And for this, I'm going to add a date created column in here. And I'm also going to sort it by the latest date created and just click save. But of course, if we need to do even more sorting, I can also add, for example, I can add a filter in here so we can filter by which accounts belong to the testnet and not, and so on. Okay, so we've done our necessary modifications to the list. Now let's have a process to help us create accounts. So I'm going to add a new process right now. And for this, I'm going to give this a meaningful name. I'll call this generate account. Okay, so once I have the name in here, just to keep it simple, within the process builder, we have white boxes to act as screens for our end users. The green boxes in here is pretty much automated functions that the system will execute. And these diamond-looking nodes here are basically decisions. And later we will explore a little bit more about the process builder. But for now, we're just going to keep it very simple, where it's straightforward generating an account. So I'm going to come back in here, give this tool once again a meaningful name. Generate account. All right. So for the mapping here, this is where we will select our tools to help us. So for example, I'll search for the Hedera components. As you can see, we have several components that we can use. In this case, it will be the generate account tool. Now in here, I can insert a custom memo. I can just configure where to store the account data and so on and so forth. If you do need more information, you can even click on this question mark and it brings you to the documentation for you to learn how to configure this. So I'm just going to do this to key in a few details.
So, Justin, while you're doing that, I just want to highlight something that is really, really critical for the audience. So normally when you're building a blockchain application, a decentralized ledger application, you have to validate with certain API keys, account information, and whether you are running the testnet or mainnet at every instance that you're making a call and receiving feedback back from the blockchain, from the decentralized ledger. Now, imagine you're having a very large application that is generating multiple wallets. It is showing links to the Hashgraph Explorer, and it's also retrieving much data in terms of transaction information from the blockchain. At each instance that you have a view or a screen, you are going to have some type of API validation or connectivity within your application. What the backend configurator does is it means that you get to write your application and you have many of these settings in one location. Your API keys and your ability to port your application from testnet to mainnet in one location. So that means instead of having to go through many different screens or interfaces, many different buttons and data lists, when you're ready to port your application from testnet, you are able to go to the backend configurator and make one simple change, which enables your application to therefore switch and access mainnet data. This is something that I think a lot of people who've actually developed applications that leverage it, you don't appreciate how powerful this is until you actually try to deploy your application and realize, oh no, without the Joget environment and the backend configurator, you basically have to go through many, many areas of code to validate and make changes. Whereas in this case, it optimizes the speed. And what's happening right now is Justin is able to, in real time, provide configurations that are also going to be a part of a business process. And I think this too is very, very important. The development of an application that leverages a decentralized ledger is not a technology issue exclusively. It has to happen within the confines of an actual business process. And so Justin is going through and defining something happening within a potential business process right now.
All right. Thank you very much, Andrew. Okay, so coming back here, I've already finished the configurations for generating a Hedera account. I do have another form just so we can select the user to generate the account for. So with this, now I can come back to the App Studio and modify my UI to expose my process. So I can now come in here into the UI builder. We are free to drag in any kind of menus into our front end. And in this case, I'm going to drag in a run process tool or menu. In this case, I'll call this generate new account. And for the process, we'll just need to reference the one that we just created just now. So I can apply the change and click save. Okay. And let's just say we want to make some quick modifications to the UI. I'm just going to go to settings and I can just pick out any kind of themes that I would like. In this case, I'll just select this color admin theme here and I can customize however I like. I can choose any color that I wish to, or even make granular changes, but we won't do that. We'll keep it simple. And I'll save the UI. And now I will come back as the end user. And you notice when I refresh, everything will change accordingly. So there's no recompiling, there's no process to wait before your app is ready. It's pretty much instant. So over here, we have our generate account process. I'm going to create one first for myself, the admin user. And when I click this button, I should be able to have an account in about no time. Okay. Now, once we wait for that, I want to describe something else also. So in the UI builder, we can change UI themes because we can understand that any kind of apps, you would want to have your own identity or your own corporate branding. So if you need to make changes, as mentioned, you can change all these colors one by one. Or if you really need to make granular changes, you can also go to advanced options And you can even key in your very own CSS or your own custom JavaScript in here to fully customize the UI to your liking. And even the themes themselves, they are extensible via plugins. So you can even create themes to your own liking, pretty much. Okay, so coming back here to the front end, our account is already generated. And if I were to click edit, this is now a valid account that we can use. But you notice we can't see our balance, or we can't easily check it on a Ledger Explorer. And well, I'm seeing my mnemonic phrase here, which is not very good. So how can I further enhance this now? With this, I'm going to open up the admin bar down here, and I'll toggle on quick edit mode. And it shows me all the composition of what my app is consisting of. So I can just directly click here. It brings me to the component to quickly modify. So in here, since I need to hide the secret key or the mnemonic phrase, I can just go to permissions. And what I can do is I can just make everything read-only and just hide this single field in here. So I do not expose it in any circumstances at all. And not only that, what if I want to show my HBAR balance? And in this case, I'm going to add a new section below here. And I'm just going to call this live ledger data, just to indicate it clearly. And let's just show one simple field in here for now, which is our HBAR balance. And I'll call it as such. Okay. Now that we have this single field in here, I can also just make this read-only. And I can just go down to data and load the data from the Hedera ledger itself via the account load binder. So in this case, we can just select our account ID in here, and we can take advantage of the property assistant to help us to grab that data. So I can just do something like this, select the account ID, and there we go. And now all we need to do is map our various values to this form. And we only need one, which is our balance itself. If you need any other details like EVM addresses or any of these indicators, you can also add as many fields as you like and map it. And finally, I can also take advantage of one more feature, which is the Hedera Explorer link to help us easily navigate to our favorite Ledger Explorer. So I'll drag one in here, and I can make use of either Hashscan or Dragon Glass. And all I need to do is configure accordingly. So I can just do this. This is the field ID of this account. Now for the button, I can pretty much customize the button. I can say verify account on Hashscan. Okay, so just like that, we're done configuring our convenience button. I'll once again click save. And now that it's saved, I can close it and come back as the end user and refresh. And just like that, I do not see my own mnemonic phrase, and I can see my own balance. And if I need to quickly validate it, I can click on it, and it brings me to Hashscan to validate all the details of the account that I've generated, such as the memo that I've keyed in, or when it expires, the balance, and so on and so forth. Okay, so we've done the first step of creating an account, but how do we transact tokens, right? Or let's say, how do I transfer HBAR to another user within Joget, for example? So
Justin?
in this case, yes, Andrew,
If
go
I can
ahead.
just interject very briefly, I just want to point out to the audience that what Justin has done in a matter of minutes is create a light wallet with an actual account on the ledger that has been funded and now can be transacted within a financial application. So all elements of the wallet, mnemonic phrase, they're valid elements of a full wallet, but now it's ready to be used and acted upon within an enterprise application. All right, thanks.
All right, excellent. So moving to the second part of the demo, we'll learn how we can perform transactions, additional transactions in here. So I'll come back now to my App Studio, and this time we'll create another form because we'll need to record down what is exactly a transaction, or what does a transaction really need. So I'm just going to do this. I'll create a form and I'll call it transaction details. And for the table name in here, I'll just follow a similar naming convention and click save. Okay, So for a transaction, very basic requirements is basically who is the sender, who is the receiver, and what is the amount that you're trying to transact. So with this knowledge, we only need 3 very simple fields in here. So I can just call this section here transaction details. Okay, so for the sender, since we already have the account within the App Studio, I can simply use a select box for our convenience. So we can just select our sender. Okay, and I can just load the data from existing forms in this case. So I'm going to load it from my existing account data form. So for the ID, we'll leave it as is. For the label, we can use the account owner, or we can even use the account ID itself. But to make it clearer, I'm going to use the account owner itself. And when I apply this change in here, you notice when I preview it, we can select the accounts via the user names itself, right? So there are many ways to represent data in your forms. And of course, we'll need another field in here to act as our receiver. And just as a simplicity, the receiver is just going to be a plain text field that we can paste it in. And finally, our hbar amount that we want to transact. So I'll call this hbar amount and apply the change. Okay, so I'll just quickly save this form first. Now, later on, what if we want to see the transaction ID of our completed transaction? In this case, we can also now add another section in here. And once again, this will also be a live ledger data, or I can just call this transaction data itself. And I can drag in another text field in here to represent that field. And I'll call this the transaction ID. So we can refer to it later on. Okay, so the transaction ID is here. It does not need to be writable, so I'm just going to make it read only and click save. Okay, so now since early on, I did mention I want to try to make this somewhat similar to a context of a loan, or let's say if I'm sending someone tokens, anything like that, I'm actually going to also make use of a file upload. So let's say if you have any kind of loan documents about your contract or any kind of documents pretty much, now we can also upload them here. So I can just call this loan docs. And since there can be many files, I can also just scroll down in here and I can enable multiple file uploads if I want to, right? And that should be about it. I'm just going to apply the change and click save. Okay, so with this, I'm also once again going to make use of the app generator. So we'll generate first a CAUD component, and later on, we will also generate an approval process, which is a simple one-step approval. And if something is approved, the App Studio will do something. If it's rejected, do something else. I think you get the idea. But we can always come back to modify the approval process later on anyway. So I'm first going to generate the CAUD component in here, and then I'm going to generate the approval process. Okay, so once we have generated both of those things, now you notice a lot more of these forms has appeared in the list, and even the approval process itself has been automatically generated. And if we were to come back to our front end in here and refresh, you notice we also have the process already exposed, but it is not quite ready yet. We still need to configure that one tool to help us transact. So with this, I'm going to come into the approval process right now, and I'm going to borrow one of these tools in here and rename it accordingly. So I can just call this send hbar, just to make it clear. And for the mapping itself, I'm going to change this out, and I'm going to add a Hedera send transaction tool. So with this, I can now configure accordingly and select my form. So I can say this is the transaction details, the payment type, it can be hbar or even non-fungible tokens, whichever the case might be. And at this point, it's pretty much about mapping these fields accordingly. So while I configure this quickly, we can also have, Andrew, if you have any inputs, you can also chime in.
The thing I think I really like about this, Justin, thank you, is that what is critical whenever you're making applications, blockchain or decentralized DLT applications is managing the data that is actually sent. It's not a regular database where you can just capture a lot of data because there's costs to it. There are size limitations associated with the different types of tokens, whether you're dealing with native tokens or non-fungible tokens. So what is very interesting that Justin is showing is that you can actually have inbuilt into your application, I'll call it a Web 2 or a non-blockchain business process to help refine the data that is going to be sent to the blockchain. And during that refinement process, you can actually incorporate other user notifications and approvals. So in the case of a loan, we might want to write the term and write the tenor, write the principal, write the payments, any certain features to the blockchain. But we don't just want to take the first person who does data entry and approve that material to be written onto the blockchain. In most businesses, particularly financial institutions, they would have a process where it would go from a particular clerk who would do an initial entry to a loan manager that would do an approval. You're able to recreate these processes using the applicant swim lanes and using the process builder functionality that's inbuilt in Joget. And then in the end, Joget makes it easy to have it so that once all conditions of the processes have been approved, it is then that we take a specific action, which might be to transact funds, to transact tokens, or to write certain key information to the ledger.
All right, thank you very much, Andrew. So over here, coming back, I've already configured the send transaction tool where it's as pretty much simple as the sender. Everything is pretty much mapped according to the form that I've created. And just for the files themselves, of course, we're not going to attach the actual file on Ledger. What we're going to do is attach the file hash itself. So let's say any users who refer to the transaction, they would know exactly what kind of files we're dealing with when this transaction has happened. So I've already done this over here. And what I'm going to do now is also to add one more tool to resurface that transaction ID for our forms to refer to. So I'm going to call this tool write transaction ID, write transaction ID. And for the mapping, I'll make use of an existing tool that we already have, which is the update form data. And for the form, I'm just going to write it back to this specific field, the transaction ID. And for the value, we can once again make use of the property assistant to help us pick out the correct workflow variable, which is this one over here, and insert it. Okay, so now that we've already done configuring these tools over here, so as it goes, if the approver approves this specific loan, for example, it would send over the HBAR and give us a transaction ID back. Okay, so now that we've done this, we can come back to our app and let's try out the process in here. So I'm going to click on this and submit a transaction details over here. Now for the sender, we can select our admin, but let's just have another user so that we can have the counterparty also. So I'm going to generate another account, and this time I'll create it for another user called Cat. So now we'll have two users that we can play around, which is admin and Cat, and both of them are now valid accounts. So I can come in here, select my sender, and of course, I'm going to need Cat's account ID. So I'm going to come here, select admin, the receiver will be Cat's account ID, and the HBAR amount can be pretty much anything within 8 decimals, which is the HBAR limit for decimal places. And for loan documents, let's just try. I'm going to attach a small little sample data in here. So let's say I attach this one single file, and let's pretend this is a PDF document, and I'll click submit. And what happens is, in a couple more seconds, hopefully it should complete that transaction. So I'll just need to approve it right now. And right now, the status, click approved, and complete. So once we do this, Joget will handle, or the App Studio will handle all the processing for this and submit a transaction for us. So hopefully in a few seconds, we should be able to see how it looks like.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think as Justin's waiting for the transaction to complete there, I just want to briefly add something because this is a financial application webinar. The Joget platform itself upon which this application is being built is ISO 27001 compliant, certified. And what exactly does that mean? Well, it means that it is certified in terms to the ISO standard for managing information security. Why is that relevant? Because it is impossible to build a financial application that will pass muster or certification without either a SOC 2 compliance or an ISO 27001 compliance. So you're able to leverage the hard work that Joget has put into getting that certification with your application.
All right. Thank you very much, Andrew. So just to quickly show you, this is the transaction ID that came back to us. So if we take a look to verify, we can see that this is indeed the correct HBAR amount from the sender to the receiver. We can even see from the transaction memo, we have a hash of that specific file. So yeah, this is one of the another key feature that the Hedera Hashgraph Application Studio has. Okay, so moving on now to the third part. Let's see if we can mint some tokens today before the session ends today. So I'm going to come back to the App Studio, and this time we'll need to record down details of what a token requires. So I'll come in here and I'll just call this mint token, right? Mint token. And I'll follow once again similar naming convention for the table. SP token data, or specifically, I think it's better if I call it history, yes, and click save. Okay, so coming back to the form in here, once again, I'm going to give this a meaningful name, mint token details. Okay, so for a token mint, well, there are just a few details that we need. So we need to know who is minting that token. Then we need to know what's the token name, the token symbol, and if it is a fungible token, what is the amount of fungible tokens that we want to mint. Now, this kind of use cases, you can use to tokenize assets, whether the asset is of a fungible nature or a non-fungible nature, like a house, for example, right? Because there's only that one unique house of that one kind. So I'll come back in here and I'll once again make use of a select box to help us select who is exactly going to mint this token. And I'll load the data from our existing forms. And for the label, I'm going to follow a similar convention. Okay, just to make sure it works. Here we go. Now for the minter, now that we have this, we'll just need to know what's the token name, the token symbol, and the amount. So I'm going to create 3 more fields in here, or 4, and name them accordingly. So as we go through this demo, you'll notice pretty much the only intensive clicking part is just to create the fields within your forms, but the rest is pretty much click, configure, and run. So hopefully this gives you a much, the needed agility to help create your decentralized applications. So I'm just going to call this mint amount. And finally, in specific to Hedera, we can also define how many decimal places our token should have. So I'm going to just call this decimals to keep it simple. Okay, and that should be it. So I'm going to save the form now. And once again, I'm also going to make use of the app generator to generate the CRUD component for us to help speed up the process. Okay, so now that we have the very basics of what a form needs, we do need one more form if we want to store the token data or cache that information locally within our app. So I'll just create one more simple form in here, and I'll just call this minted token so that we can tell the difference later on. And I'll just do this SP token data, give it a table name. So once the token is minted later on, it will have a few more details that we will need to take note of. So namely, of course, the token itself will have a token ID that we can refer to. So I'll need the token ID itself. And of course, we got the other details like the token name, the symbol, and well, so on and so forth. So I'm just going to do the same thing in here. So token name, all right. And the token symbol, we also want to save that. And finally, who's the minter? Exactly. So we'll say minter. Okay. So these are just the very basics. We can always come back here to add more information to store if we need to. And now I can come back to the App Studio and create one more process. So with this, I'm going to add a new one and name it accordingly. And for this, I'll call this mint token. Or to make it a bit more clear, mint fungible token. And for the variable itself, I'm just once again going to store the transaction ID so we can easily reference it. And it's even available for you to store the transaction URL itself within the process context if we need to. So I'm just going to leave it here. And for this, I'm going to keep it much more simpler. So I'm just going to have a single node where it directly mints the token. So I'll just end it like so. And for this tool, name it accordingly. And finally, for the mapping itself, I'm going to select the Hedera mint token tool this time. So I'll mint it. Oh no, okay. Okay, I may have accidentally clicked a button here. Okay, so this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to come back in here and add this mint token tool. Cool, we're back on track. And now we just need to fill in all the necessary informations, like who exactly is the minter. So the minter, the mnemonic phrase, once again, we are not keying in the direct mnemonic phrase itself because, well, for security reasons, that's one of them. And we do not want it to be a fixed value. It should be retrieving the account data dynamically every single time. So we're using something called hash variables to help us dynamically fill in that minter's data. So for this, I'm just going to configure it accordingly. And if you have anything else to chime in, Andrew, you can also do it now. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what is critical to note that, so Justin has the ability with the system to mint native tokens, to mint NFTs, in many instances to update and manage certain data associated with the minting of the particular token. And what he was saying about the mnemonic phrase is something that I just wrote in the group. So the mnemonic phrase is really the phrase that you need to rebuild your wallet on another application or another platform. So Justin has abstracted it in Joget. And why would we want to do that? Well, remember, if we're building a loan management app, it could be that some of the loan recipients are logging in remotely, but they should only have access to their own account. And in that instance, we want to make sure that when they do log in, the only account they have access to is also linked to only their wallet that is non-custodial, so that is residing on the Hedera DLT. So this is why we are able to do this programmatically to ensure the security and ownership still stays with the person, but we're able to work and manipulate the wallets as part of a business process. So I think ultimately the key is this is a tool for building applications that actually solve problems within a business as opposed to an R&D blockchain tool. This is how you integrate DLT within your business process.
All right, thank you very much, Andrew. So coming back here, I'm almost done configuring this, where now we need to store the token data to cache into our app. Now I am missing some fields. So the best part about the App Studio is we can always very quickly make changes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back to the App Studio. I'll save it first, just to be safe. Okay. and just add that fields into my form. So for example, if I'm just missing 2 more fields, I can just drag them in as such. And this will be the token type. So we can tell if this is a fungible token or a NFT. And finally, we'll also store if this is a testnet, a generated token. So it's testnet. Apply the change and click save. Okay, so we have our changes. We can very quickly now come back to our process where we are minting tokens and just make those changes very quickly. So for this properties, I'm going to rename it mint token so that's clearer. And now we can come back to our configuration to finish the configurations accordingly, such as the token type, and finally is testnet flag. Okay, and finally, all these details, if we want to know if the transaction is validated or not, we could do that from here, but I'm just going to select these, like the transaction ID and the URL itself. Okay, so just to make sure we do have our transaction ID and URL in here, we are ready to mint some tokens once we hit this button. Okay, right. So for this part, now I can come back to the UI to expose this function here. So I can scroll down and I have a CIUD already generated previously. So at this point, I just need to drag one more run processing tool and select my mint fungible token process. So I'll call this mint new tokens, apply the change and click save. Okay, so if that should be it, there should be nothing left except this one more form that I've forgotten to fill in. So I'm just going to quickly make that correction. Mint token. Okay, now we're rocking. So let's save it and come back as the end user. Once again, refresh, and now we have the function that we're ready to try it out. So in here, we just need to select who's our minter and give this a meaningful name and symbol and so on. So we can say that for a token name, I can do a live test. And the symbol, let's just put it the same name, just to make it clear. And let's just say we want to mint 303 tokens with 2 decimal places in here. So if we do this, and when we hit submit, it should mint that token directly. Right. So let's just see. And FYI, none of this is orchestrated. So a lot of this is being done live. So if we want to check if our token minting is successful, we could come in here and okay, something's not right. So let's just very quickly fix that issue. So we're also going to see how we can very quickly triage any kind of configuration issues from our App Studio by going to the logs. So for most developers out there, the first place to look is to see the logs itself, to see exactly where has possibly gone wrong. And okay, we can exactly tell what's wrong here. So let's go make that change.
And this is actually, again, a really, it's a good point, because when the process is made, you'll notice Justin went to the back end and he was able to look at the process monitor. You can see exactly where a process failed or stopped, right? So in some instances, let's just say you request a transaction of a certain number of tokens, but there are no tokens in the wallet. Well, in our DLT experience, you can't have negative tokens in a wallet. So it would make sense that the transaction would not go through. But when it doesn't go through, you also want to know why it doesn't go through. And this is the process of troubleshooting that's done, right? So you do get really fine-grained control over the processes, right down to understanding what error or what it is that is happening that has caused a problem. You have full audit trail as well, which has actually saved me on many an occasion whenever a user has done something that I did not anticipate. The audit trail was able to let me know who logged in, who did the action, what steps they took that failed. I could map it to the process and either correct the user or correct the software. So we're seeing this in real time right now.
Awesome. Okay, so now that we have that, just to make it a bit more clearer on our audience over here, I'm also going to throw in the transaction ID so that we can see a lot clearer if, well, we have a transaction here. So I'm going to quickly just do this again, transaction ID. And for this section, let's name it search, transaction data, make it read only. Okay. And just for
We get the Explore button.
Yep,
Yeah.
one more.
Cool.
Thank you for reminding me. Okay.
That's always my
transaction.
favorite.
Yep, the convenience. Verify transaction on Explorer. Yep, that should do it. So I'll apply the change. Okay, and click save. All right. And now I just need to resurface that transaction data if required. So just to describe a concept that we have, often a lot of the data, if it's not necessary, what we try not to do is to expose all sorts of data unnecessarily into our forms or onto our end users to explicitly handle. But instead, what we do is we will allow you the option to resurface specific data to your forms only if you provide as such. So in most circumstances, it will not do that for you if you do not need it at all. So in this case, I'm going to use the update form data pool in here to write back that transaction ID into my form. So in this case, I can just select the transaction ID and the workflow variable should give us that value. Variable transaction ID, there we go. And insert it and done. Okay, so now that we have it, let's give it a second try. So I'll come back in here and I will clear this just to make it a bit clearer on our audience. And let's mint some tokens again. So for the admin user, where I'm going to mint it based on him, the symbol, the mint amount, and let's define the same exact decimals, which is 2 places.
So what we're effectively doing here is we're live minting tokens as part of a business process. And I think it's really helpful for you to see, because I just want to give as an example, I made a private debt loan tracking system where each counterparty, each signatory and counterparty had their own unique minted token that was being used to track the debt quantities. And in that instance, we had to have a workflow to capture the debt contract agreements. And as part of that workflow, we had to mint tokens that would represent the outstanding balances of the principal plus interest that was due, right? It's actually a relatively complex process because in this instance, you are pairing wallets together that will be used to move tokens back and forth to effectively represent a line of credit. All of that was done within Joget. I absolutely empathize with Justin because where he is doing this in a matter of 40 minutes, well, it took me considerably longer with help to achieve that end objective. But in the end, it was a system that was created, and I genuinely don't believe we could have done it in that short period of time without the power of Joget. So I'm going to take it back to Justin.
All right. Thank you very much, Andrew. So we're reaching on the top of the hour here almost. So what I'm going to do is go back to my sample app in here. And what I did while Andrew was going through it just now is I can also come in here and try to mint some tokens as a reference, right? So this already has the answer. All we need to do as a user, if you want to learn how to create your apps, is to come in and you can reference all these forms and all these tools to see how it is configured from start to end. So you can use this as your own reference, so to speak, or even clone it so that you already have a base to start with. So coming back here, since I've already minted this token, it gives us this transaction. And we also have the data of this new token stored. So if I were to click view, we can see we have a token ID provided for us. And if I were to check it on a live Ledger Explorer, we can see our token is minted on the spot just now. You can see all the details about, well, who's the treasury, who's the minter, pretty much, the token ID, and all these other details, and even the token keys itself to find out what is the features of this token, whether if there's KYC applied, or who exactly has permissions to freeze or wipe the token, who can control the supply, so on and so forth. And with that, I would like to pass the microphone back to Penny. Thank you.
Thank you, Justin, and thank you, Andrew. So once again, thank you very much to the both of you for the very insightful demo. And with that, I believe the audience now has a better understanding of the Hashgraph Application Studio. So now let's move on to the Q&A and let's see what are the questions that the audience has for us. So the first question is, can we customize the UI of the decentralized applications built using the Hashgraph Application Studio?
So very good question, Penny. Quick answer, yes, pretty much you can. So you have the freedom to even modify it low code if you need to, but in most cases, you can also no code the modifications in the App Studio. Good question.
Okay. So
Can I just add something very, very brief to that?
Sure thing.
Justin's absolutely right, but by modify, you can add icons, change the entire layout, make it completely mobile friendly, and all the applications, Joget provides a native progressive web app functionality. So that means you can actually make an application, have it run as an app, and even deploy it in an app store. So I absolutely know you can change every aspect of the user experience and interface.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Andrew. So the second question that we have is, can we build dApps with the functionality to mint and burn NFT, aside from just fungible token on the Hashgraph Application Studio?
All right, good question once again. Short answer, yes. So the previous demo we've done about fungible tokens, but the sample app that comes with every Hashgraph Application Studio installation, there's even examples on how we can mint non-fungible tokens. So you can check out our reference forms, the processes on how it's configured and how they all keep together. So yeah, good question.
Okay. So the last question, due to the interest of time, are there any capabilities on the Hashgraph Application Studio that enable users to manage and monitor their dApps performance?
Absolutely, yes. Although we're on the top of the hour, I would like to show more. Short answer, we have the application performance management module in every App Studio installation. So for every apps that you have already deployed or even in testing, you get to see its full metrics about the throughput, the average times. You can see various details about your app's performance top to down, even down to the individual pages and down to the individual queries and service calls. So short answer, definitely yes. So good question.
Okay, thank you. So that's it for the Q&A. And before we go, we would like to share some of the resources where you will be able to make use of. So if you go over to the website www.hashgraphappstudio.com, you will be able to find these step-by-step video tutorials that will walk you through how to generate a Hedera account, sending transactions, minting tokens, burning tokens, minting an NFT, and how you can create a simple token swap app. And if you would like to learn more about the Joget platform and no-code, low-code technology, feel free to head over to the same website and submit a voucher request with the request code Hedera, and we will get back to you as soon as we receive your submissions. Before we go, don't forget to fill up the feedback form directed to you after the workshop, as we would love to hear from you about your workshop experience. Thank you, everyone, and we will see you in the next workshop. Have a nice day.